My brother got married on a Saturday in June, and I was not in the wedding photos. Not in the formal ones taken outside the church. Not in the ones on the steps with the whole family lined up in matching shades of blush and navy. Not in the one my mother later had printed on canvas and hung in the living room above the fireplace, the one where everyone is laughing at something my father said, and the light is catching my sister-in-law's veil just right. I know all this because my aunt sent me a copy of that photo 6 weeks later with a note that said she thought I might want one. I did not write back. My name is Cara. I am 29 years old. And for the 4 years before that wedding, I had been the one quietly making sure my family could still afford the house that wedding reception was held in. Nobody thought to mention that part either. I need to back up, because the wedding was not where it started. It was only where the last polite fiction finally ran out of room. My family, my parents, my brother, and my younger sister had always operated around a kind of unspoken ranking system. My brother, Daniel, was the golden one. He had the easy charm and the college baseball career and the way of walking into rooms, like he assumed they would be glad to see him. My sister, Becca, was the pretty one, the social one, the one my mother loved to introduce at parties because she reflected well. And then there was me. I was the responsible one, which in my family's private language meant the useful one, the overlooked one, the one you called when something was broken and needed fixing, but did not think to include when the fixing was done and the celebrating started. I had known this my whole life, in the vague background way, you know something you have never said out loud. I worked in financial planning and risk management, the kind of work that nobody at a family dinner can summarize cleanly, so people stopped asking. I was good at it. I was very good at it. But competence in a field your family does not understand reads as absence, and my family had long since filled the absence with their own story about who I was. The story went like this. Cara is fine. Cara handles things. Cara doesn't need much. Cara will be there. For years, I played along because it was easier than the alternative. And then my parents hit a wall. 3 years before the wedding, my father's contracting business lost a major municipal contract he had been counting on to carry them through winter. My parents had refinanced the house twice in the previous decade, and the equity was thin. My mother called me on a Tuesday morning, and I could hear her trying to keep her voice steady in the way she never tried when she called Daniel. She said they were behind on the second mortgage. She said she did not know what to do. She said she was sorry to ask. I told her not to be sorry. And I meant it, because back then, I still believed that if I helped them quietly, with no conditions and no fanfare, they would eventually understand that love does not require receipts, but it should at least require acknowledgement. I restructured the debt through a private loan agreement I drew up with my own attorney. I became the lien holder on a portion of the house equity, not because I wanted leverage, but because that was the only structure that made financial and legal sense and protected everyone involved. I covered 14 months of payments while my father rebuilt his client base. I co-signed a business line of credit when the bank would not extend one on his name alone. I did not tell Daniel, I did not tell Becca. My parents asked me not to, because they did not want it to change how the family saw them. I agreed. I should not have, but I agreed, because that is what you do when you love people who are too proud to be saved loudly. My father turned things around. Not all the way, not to where they had been, but enough. The house stayed. The business recovered to a workable size. My mother started going to her book club again, and hosting small dinners and acting like the previous 14 months had been nothing more than a rough patch that the family had weathered together. I watched this happen from my apartment 2 hours away, and told myself it was enough. That they knew. That it would come out eventually in the way real things do, quietly and without ceremony. It did not come out. It got buried deeper. By the time Daniel announced his engagement to a woman named Sasha, my parents had rewritten the story so thoroughly that even they seemed to believe it. My father had stabilized the business. The house was theirs again, in every way that felt real to them. They had survived a hard few years through grit and family solidarity, which apparently meant the 5 of them plus whatever invisible scaffolding had been holding the floor up. When my mother talked about that period at Daniel's engagement party, she described it as a lesson in resilience. She looked at my father when she said it. She did not look at me. I told myself it did not matter. I had not helped them to be thanked publicly. I had helped them because they needed it, and I could. That was still true. But then the wedding planning started, and I began to understand that silence has a cost that compounds. I was not asked to be a bridesmaid. Sasha had her sister, her 2 college friends, and Becca. When my mother told me, she said it in that particular tone she had perfected over the years, the one that explained things while making clear no explanation was owed. She said Sasha had her own vision, that it was her day, that I would have such a wonderful time as a guest. I said of course. I sent Sasha a generous gift from her registry and a handwritten note that I meant. Over the following months, there were engagement dinners and bridal showers and a bachelorette weekend that Becca organized and that I was not invited to, and a family portrait session for the rehearsal dinner invitations that my mother scheduled on a weekend she knew I could not travel. Each individual thing had an explanation. Together they formed a pattern, and the pattern said what my family had always believed. That I was peripheral. That I was the reliable background character, useful in a crisis, not required for the celebration. I kept showing up anyway. I drove down for the rehearsal dinner. I sat at a table with 2 of my parents' neighbors and Daniel's college roommate, while my mother and father and Becca and Daniel and Sasha's family all sat at the long head table with the candles and the flowers. I smiled when Daniel gave his toast. I clapped when my father cried. I drove home that night alone and sat in my car in the parking garage of my building for 11 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The wedding day itself was beautiful. The church was full of white peonies and afternoon light. Sasha was genuinely lovely. Daniel looked happier than I had ever seen him, and whatever else was true, that was also true, and I held onto it. I wore a dress I had bought specifically for the occasion, a deep green that I had spent more time choosing than I would admit to anyone. I sat in the 3rd row, not in the family section. The photographer moved through the crowd with the efficient energy of someone working a timeline. I watched the family arrangements happen without anyone asking me to join. My parents and Daniel and Sasha and Becca at the church steps. The same group plus Sasha's parents. The same group plus her grandparents. I stood near the edge of the gravel path, with my clutch in my hands, not moving toward anyone, waiting to see if anyone would move toward me. My mother looked at me once. She looked away. I did not cry. I was not going to cry at my brother's wedding over a photograph. But something finished in me in that moment, quietly and without ceremony. The same way things in my family always happened. The last careful lie I had been maintaining about who I was to these people dissolved, and what was underneath it was not rage. It was clarity. 2 weeks after the wedding, I called my attorney. Not to be vindictive. Not because I was operating on emotion. I called her because I had a financial structure with my parents that existed on goodwill and handshake assumptions, and I had just been given a very clear demonstration of exactly how much goodwill was being extended in return. She walked me through my options with the patience of someone who had seen this situation before in different clothes. The loan agreement was legitimate. The lien on the equity was documented and recorded. The co-signature on the business line of credit meant I had legal exposure I had not revisited in over 2 years. She said if I wanted to restructure or exit any of those positions, I had every right to do so with proper notice. I told her I wanted to give notice. I want to be honest about why I had not done this sooner, because I know it is the first question people ask. Why did you wait so long? Why did you keep helping them when they kept diminishing you? The answer is not simple, but it is also not complicated. I kept helping because they were my family, and I had spent my entire life being the one who did not need things. And the habit of not needing things is very hard to break when the alternative is admitting you needed something and did not get it. I stayed because I confused proximity with belonging. I stayed because my father, once, years ago, told me I was the one he never worried about, and I had made the mistake of hearing that as a compliment instead of a sentence. I stopped when I understood that none of that was a reason to keep funding a version of myself I had never agreed to. My attorney drafted the formal notices. The co-signature on the business line of credit would be withdrawn at the next renewal cycle, which was 90 days out. The equity lien would be formally reasserted, and the private loan agreement placed on a structured repayment schedule with commercial interest from the original disbursement date. It was not punitive, it was simply what the document had always said, before everyone chose to act as though it did not exist. All future communication was to go through counsel. Then I thought about the photograph on the canvas above the fireplace. The one with everyone laughing, the one where I was not. I told my attorney I wanted to send my parents a copy of the formal notices in a specific way. I wanted them delivered to the house on a Monday morning in a box, the kind of flat white gift box you get from a department store, tied with a ribbon. She looked at me over her glasses and asked if I was serious. I said yes. She tied the ribbon herself. I know how that sounds. I know there is a version of this story where the symbolic gesture looks petty. But my family communicated everything important through appearances and surfaces, through what was displayed and what was withheld, through who was in the photograph and who was standing off to the side on the gravel. I was finally speaking a language they would not be able to pretend they did not understand. The box was delivered on a Monday at 10 in the morning. My mother called me 17 minutes later. He let it ring. My father called 4 minutes after that. Then my mother again. Then a number I did not recognize, which I later found out was Daniel calling from Sasha's phone because I had, in a moment of foresight 2 weeks after the wedding, set his contact to go straight to voicemail. I did not answer any of them. I forwarded everything to my attorney and went to a yoga class. The voicemails were what you would expect, if you have ever watched someone realize the ground has shifted under them. My mother's first one was confused, the performance of a woman who had not yet decided whether to be hurt or angry. My father's was direct, he said. There had clearly been a misunderstanding, and we needed to talk immediately. My mother's second one dropped the confusion and moved straight to wounded, the particular register she used when she wanted me to feel guilty for something she had done. She said I was tearing the family apart. She said I was doing this because I had always had issues. She said she did not raise me to be this kind of person. I saved every voicemail, not out of malice. Out of the same professional instinct that had made me keep copies of every document and every wire transfer and every co-signature for 3 years. You learn, in my line of work, that the version of events people tell themselves rarely survives contact with the paper trail. Daniel called me 2 days later from his own number, which meant he had figured out the voicemail block. He did not leave a message. He texted instead, "Cara, whatever is going on, this is not the way to handle it. Call Mom. She's a mess." I read it twice and put my phone face down on my desk. He came in person on a Thursday evening. I heard his knock and looked through the peephole and opened the door because he was my brother, and some habits survive even after the clarity arrives. He was in jeans and a gray pullover, and he looked tired in a way that I recognized, the particular exhaustion of someone who has just learned that a comfortable story was not as solid as it seemed. He started with logistics. He said my parents did not understand the documents. He said my father thought the loan had been a gift. I told him gifts do not typically come with lien paperwork filed at the county recorder's office. He said my mother was beside herself. I asked which part of the situation was troubling her specifically. He said, quietly, that he had not known. I told him I knew he had not known. That was the point. Our parents had asked me to keep it quiet, and I had for 3 years. And in those 3 years, they had used that quiet to build a version of our family, in which I was a pleasant and slightly distant background figure, who occasionally showed up at events, and did not require much consideration. I told him about the engagement party, and the bridesmaid decision, and the portrait session scheduled on a weekend I could not travel. I told him about the wedding photos. I told him I had stood on that gravel path for 6 minutes, watching my entire family arrange itself for photographs, and not one person had turned around and waved me in. He did not say that I was being dramatic. He did not tell me I was misremembering. He sat with it for a moment, the way someone sits with something that reshapes what they thought they understood, and then he said he was sorry. Just that. "I am sorry, Cara." It was the only apology I received from anyone, and it came from the one person who had not known to give it sooner. My parents arrived the following Sunday without calling ahead, which I had expected because my parents had always believed that rules about notice and communication applied to other kinds of families. I opened the door and found the two of them on my doorstep. My mother in the cardigan she wore when she wanted to look reasonable. My father with the expression he used in business meetings when he was not yet willing to show his hand. My father opened by saying the paperwork was a shock, and that they had obviously misunderstood the nature of what I had done for them. I said I was aware they had misunderstood it, and that the misunderstanding had been convenient for a very long time. My mother said I was making everything into a transaction, that family did not work that way, that I had always been too much in my own head. I asked her whether family was working the way it was supposed to work when she looked at me on the church steps and looked away. She said that was a completely different matter. I said it was the same matter. It had always been the same matter. The reason I had a legal claim on a portion of their equity and a co-signature on their business line and a 3-year paper trail of wire transfers was because I had tried to show them, in the only language I had ever been allowed to speak fluently, that I was present, that I was committed, that I belonged to this family in ways that could not be cropped out of a photograph. And they had taken everything I offered and still found a way to arrange the frame without me. My father's jaw tightened. He said I was twisting things to make myself the victim when the reality was that I had made a business decision to help them, and now I was using it as emotional leverage. I told him those were two separate accusations and only one of them was true. Yes, the loan agreement was a business structure. That was my doing, and I stood behind it. But the wedding was not a business. The portrait session was not a business. Being seated in the third row at my own brother's wedding while my family filled the pew ahead of me was not a financial matter. That part was simply a choice they made about who I was to them, and I had finally decided to agree with their assessment and act accordingly. My mother's face did the thing it did when she had run out of angles. She switched to grief, the soft version, the one that had worked on me when I was 23 and terrified of hurting her. She said she did not understand when I had become so cold. She said I used to be her daughter who just wanted everyone to be happy. I said I still wanted everyone to be happy. I just no longer believed that my job was to be unhappy, quietly in service of that goal. She cried. My father put his arm around her and looked at me with the expression of a man who had decided I was the problem and was waiting for me to apologize for it. I did not apologize. I asked if they had brought counsel with them, and when they said no, I told them that per the notice my attorney had sent, all substantive discussion needed to go through that channel, and that I hoped they had retained someone good. My father said this was not over. I told him I knew. I said I had built the agreement carefully enough that I expected it would take several months to resolve through the proper process, and that I had set aside time for exactly that. Then I told them I had an early morning and closed the door. I want to describe what the next several months looked like without overstating the drama of it, because the truth is that most of the actual process was not dramatic. It was paperwork and phone calls between attorneys and a mediation session that my parents attended with a lawyer who had clearly been briefed more on emotion than on documentation, and who spent the first 40 minutes trying to reframe my loan as a family gift before my attorney produced the county filing with the original recording date, and the room went quiet in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when the factual record contradicts the preferred story. My parents proposed a settlement. They would put me on the deed formally, acknowledge the loan as a loan, and ask that I waive the accrued interest in exchange for a payment plan on the principal. There was a non-disparagement clause that would have prevented me from discussing the financial arrangement with extended family. I countered that the deed change was a baseline condition, not a concession, that the interest was not negotiable given the duration and the circumstances, and that I would not agree to any clause that limited my right to tell the truth about my own financial history. They refused the counter. We went to the next stage. Somewhere in those months, Becca called me. She was the only one who called without a directive from our parents, and I could hear in her voice that she was genuinely trying to understand, not manage me. She asked if I was okay. She said she had not known about the money either. She said she had always thought I was just very private. I told her I had been private because our parents had asked me to be, and that I understood she had not been part of that, and that I did not have anger toward her specifically. She asked if we could have dinner sometime. I said yes, and I meant it. Becca was the second person to apologize to me without being required to. The legal resolution came down on a Tuesday morning. The lien was confirmed and converted to a formal deed position. The loan balance with interest was placed on a structured repayment plan. The business line co-signature termination proceeded as scheduled, and my parents had 30 days to refinance under their own names or arrange an alternative guarantor. The non-disparagement demand was dropped. When my attorney told me the outcome, I was at my desk eating a late lunch, and I remember thinking that it should feel bigger than it did. But resolution in my line of work rarely announces itself. It just arrives, quietly and on paper, the way things in my family always happened. I said thank you and hung up and finished eating. My father sent me a letter 3 weeks later. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope and put it in a drawer for 4 days before I opened it. It was 2 pages. The first page was an argument, a final version of the claim, that what I had done was out of proportion, that I had turned a family matter into a legal confrontation, that I had embarrassed him with vendors and neighbors and people who had known the family for years. The second page was a question. It said he needed to understand when I had decided to stop caring about my family. I read it twice, and then I wrote a single line on a note card. I did not stop caring. I stopped performing. I mailed it back and did not expect a response. There was not one. My mother did not write. She handled things the way she always handled them. When the formal channels failed, she began a quiet, social revision of the story. The kind that happens at book clubs, and after church and in text chains, I am not part of. I know because mutual family friends occasionally reach out with that careful energy people have when they are reporting something they know is unkind. My mother's current version, as best I can piece together, is that I had a breakdown related to stress and overwork, and I made choices I will eventually regret. That is a much cleaner story than the one with the documents in the lien, and the 3 years of wire transfers, and the wedding photograph. I understand why she prefers it. Daniel and I are careful with each other now. Not cold, but careful, in the way of 2 people who have had to recalibrate the distance between them after a map turned out to be wrong. He and Sasha sent me a holiday card this past winter. He called on my birthday. It is not what it was, but what it was not actually what I thought it was, so we are building something new on a more accurate foundation. I think we will be okay. I think we are already okay in ways that matter. I moved into a larger apartment in the spring. I have a proper home office now, the kind with good light, and on the bookshelf behind my desk, I keep a single framed thing. A copy of the county deed, from the original lien filing, the one that proves the loan was real and documented from the beginning, the one that predates every attempt to rewrite history. It is not something anyone else would understand if they saw it. My friends who visit think it is a real estate thing related to my work. Sometimes I tell them it is a reminder. They ask of what? I tell them, it is a reminder that you can love people clearly and still require them to be honest. That generosity is not the same as invisibility. That the cost of being the reliable one is not supposed to include your right to be seen. I still think about the wedding, not the way I thought about it in the car that night, with the particular weight of something that had just broken. I think about it the way you think about a moment that turned out to be important in a direction you did not expect. I stood on that gravel path and waited for someone to turn around, and nobody did, and that was the truest thing my family ever told me about themselves. Not a lapse, not a bad moment. A statement, made in the language of arrangement and exclusion that my family spoke more fluently than any other. I heard it. I stopped arguing with it. I do not consider what happened revenge. I know the word gets attached to stories like this, and I understand why, because there is a version of the narrative where the person left out of the photograph ends up in control of the deed, and that reads as poetic justice. Maybe it is. But what I was actually after was never punishment. It was the chance to exist in my own life on terms I had agreed to, without the quiet, ongoing cost of being the person who holds everything together from the outside while being kept from the inside. I have that now. Some mornings I make coffee and stand at my window and think about the kind of person I was for those years, the one who wired money and kept quiet and showed up to events and stood a step to the left of every family photograph and told herself it would eventually be enough. I feel something for that version of myself that is not quite grief and not quite anger. It is something closer to the feeling you have when you look at an old photograph of yourself and recognize someone you used to be, someone who needed things she had not yet learned to ask for clearly. She was doing what she knew how to do. She just did not know, yet, that being tolerated was not the same thing as belonging. That the people who say you are not needed are very often the people who cannot survive without you. That blood is a fact. Love is a practice. And the two do not always overlap. She knows now. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself somewhere in it, the person who keeps the quiet, covers the gap, stays at the edge of the gravel path, I am not going to tell you what to do. I do not think the decision to stop performing love for people who are only watching the performance is one anyone can make for you. I just want you to know that the ground does not disappear when you stop holding it up for everyone else. Most of the time, you find out the ground was yours, all along. Mine had my name on it. It still does.